Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar about the Draft Wildfire and Landscape Resilience Action Plan with a focus on Central California. We're just going to wait a moment as people transition in from the waiting room and we get our screen pulled up for you all. All right, let's get started. So again, thank you for joining this webinar about the Draft Wildfire and Landscape Resilience Action Plan with a focus on Central California. Over the next 75 minutes, you can expect to learn about the key components of the draft action plan, including the framework for mobilizing regional action. You'll have a chance to ask task force staff questions about the plan and learn about the process for submitting comments. You'll also be hearing directly from two different people working collaboratively to advance wildfire resilience in Central California. And today we will not be discussing detailed specifics about funding opportunities and programs. Just a little bit of housekeeping about the Zoom webinar platform. We ask that you use the Zoom chat function to communicate any technical issues to hosts. But we also ask that you use the Q&A function to communicate any questions to hosts or the speakers. So again, that's chat to communicate any issues you might be having with the platform, but please keep all of your topical questions in the Q&A feature of the Zoom webinar. During the Q&A time, there will also be an option to raise your hand, and we can call on you to come off of mute and ask your question directly. Finally, we are recording this webinar, and a recording will be made available at wildfiretaskforce.org. Before we dive into the content of the webinar, we are going to do a quick audience poll. This will help us to better understand who's in the room here with us virtually and how familiar you all might be with the content that's being developed. We have 3 questions for you about your familiarity with the task force, 1 being least familiar, 5 being most familiar, and how familiar you are with the draft action plan. Again, 1 is least familiar, 5 most familiar, and then also asking about how many meetings you have attended before with the task force. Just going to take a couple more moments here for people to fill in these poll questions, familiarity with the task force, familiarity with the action plan, and regional meetings you may have previously attended. All right, I think we can close the poll and quickly share the results. Thanks to all of you who responded. It looks like there is fairly strong familiarity with this group here today. Of the task force, the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force, the most common answers are very familiar or highly familiar. But there are some people joining us who are not as familiar. So welcome and thank you for coming to the webinar today. Although it looks like the group is pretty familiar with the Wildfire Task Force, you all are here because you may be less familiar with the action plan. So you are in the right place to learn more today. And it looks like most of today's attendees have attended a regional meeting previously of the task force, although some have not. And we will share some information at the end about the upcoming task force meetings. So thank you all. Welcome to those who are new. Welcome back to those who have been to some of these meetings before. With that in mind, let's go over the agenda. We'll start today with a brief presentation by Patrick Wright, the task force director, that introduces the draft action plan, as well as the framework for mobilizing regional action that's within the action plan. This will be followed by a time for audience members to ask questions to Patrick about the content that he shared about the draft action plan. Then we will hear from two speakers, Kostula Valianos from the State Coastal Conservancy and Jeff Hayes from the Forest Service, about their organization's efforts to advance wildfire landscape resilience in Central California. This will be followed by a longer Q&A period for the regional presenters or for Patrick Wright about the action plan. We'll close out with a little bit of information about how to download, access the plan, access the web feedback form about the plan, and stay connected with future task force efforts. So with all of that set up, I'm going to pass the mic over to Patrick Wright, Director of the Wildfire Task Force.
Thank you, Madeline. Glad to be here. Glad we have a good large group of folks who have various levels of background on the task force and action plan. So what we're going to do is just try to give you the really brief summary of where the task force is, and then basically an overview of the key elements of the action plan that's now out as a draft and under review. So starting with the task force itself, the most recent version of the task force was launched just a little over 5 years ago in January of 2021. We issued the state's first action plan, which was an attempt to try to pull together all the various efforts of, in particular, federal and state agencies in the wildfire space, together with 100 specific action items, so that folks around the state could better understand how the state is trying to address this issue, with a specific focus on alignment, on trying to align the work of federal, state, local, tribal, and private entities on all aspects of wildfire resilience. And our governing board, our executive committee, reflects that diversity. We have a number of state executive leaders at CNRA, CAL FIRE, Cal EPA, OPR, federal, local, and tribal as well. And then we've got a broader structure of the task force itself that includes a small interagency team of folks at CNRA, CAL FIRE, and DOC, about a dozen different work groups, as you can see there on the left, on all sorts of issues related to wildfire resilience, and a science advisory panel that's helping provide us with up-to-date information. And then at the bottom, we have this interagency planning and integration team, where we use as sort of a vetting process for everything that moves through. We typically have 4 meetings a year, 2 in Sacramento and 2 in the regions. The regional meetings are really our signature efforts to get out there. We had our last meeting in Jamestown in March, which was extremely well attended. We typically have 2 or 3 panels of regional leaders to both showcase the efforts in their region, but also challenge the state and federal execs on issues and barriers they're having to get things done. And then, of course, we have field trips the following day. Our next meeting is going to be up in Humboldt County in October. Again, the same type of a format, all-day meeting on, I believe it's the second Thursday in October, and then Friday tours. We'll be getting out registration and other materials on that sometime really soon. We've certainly accomplished a lot with your help in the last 5 years. As many of you know, we had the benefit of large early state and federal investments, almost $6 billion that has gone out the door related to wildfire resilience. That's enabled us to ramp up our treatments to more than 700,000 acres, including a doubling of prescribed fire. We've just gone through an accelerated, streamlined regulatory process where for the last year and a half, folks have been getting their projects approved in less than 30 days. And there's an effort in the legislature right now to try to see if we can come up with a long-term sustained version of that. We've also built capacity primarily through the RFFC plan, the Department of Conservation, which is a whole new effort to try to help local and regional entities build the capacity they need to develop regional priority plans. And then we developed a broad set of interagency strategies. We call them shared strategies on everything from prescribed fire to recreation. We have a new one out on reforestation, private landowner assistance, et cetera. These are efforts, again, to try to take various agency programs that are typically in silos and develop shared strategies that work across those agencies. And then finally, a lot of effort on new data and tools, including a tracking system where you can see all of the projects that have been completed in the last 5 years across the state, where they are, what type of project it is, who the lead agency is, et cetera. So a lot's underway, a lot to build on as we move forward with an update. We're required by statute to update our plan every 5 years. We've been at it now for quite a while and updating this plan. We issued a draft little over a month ago, back in early June. And it contains sort of three major well, actually, we start with emphasizing the foundation. As I mentioned, the next slide talks about, why we're in a different position today than we were 5 years ago. First and foremost, we have a much better understanding of the benefits of things like prescribed fire, of having a fuel break network, of thinning small diameter trees, of working together collaboratively at certainly the community level. Great new information on the benefits of things like of home hardening, defensible space, et cetera. If folks are interested in that sort of up to the minute information, you can go on our website and find that scientific document that walks through each of those issues, talks about where there's agreement scientifically, where there's a less agreement, and where we're trying to fill in those gaps. Secondly, again, on capacity, used to be the only entities that got money were folks that had shovel-ready projects. We now have had money to actually build capacity. Department of Conservation's had more than $150 million to do that, and a new chunk of money in Prop 4. So that's given us a really solid organizational foundation to grow. Again, streamlined processes and science and data tools. All of these foundational efforts are going to allow us to enable the next plan to be much more strategic and allow us to scale like never before. So in thinking about how to organize the plan, we really thought of sort of three major areas. One is a landscape strategy, which many of you are familiar with, community strategy, and thirdly, a framework for actually how we're going to get this work done at both levels. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap between all three of these things, but funding and other programs does tend to flow at the landscape level and or the community level. We are doing what we can to sort of bridge the gap there, but also respect some of the key differences that are involved at different scales. So starting with the landscape strategy, I'm going to walk you through the 6 major elements you see here, starting with our first slide where summarizes we did a lot of modeling and data analysis that showed if we really focus on the high and very high hazard landscapes across the state and those areas in Southern and Central California that have the highest burn probability or ignition risk, we can obviously maximize our benefits. You get something like a 3 to 4 times greater reduction in fire risk if we focus on high priority areas. So we're going to be doing what we can to try to encourage local and regional entities to focus on those parcels and other parcels of high significance in local and regional planning efforts. The second priority is also to be focused on, particularly in the Sierra Nevada, where we've got extremely dense forests that are subject to imminent tree mortality. And so a strong emphasis on facilitating, encouraging treatments beyond those that are just needed for fire hazard to better deal with drought, climate change, insect infestations, et cetera. So a real forest health focus in addition to just a fire focus. So that's number 2. Number 3, A lot of effort is going into expanding a fuel break and fire management zone network. These are known as pods. For those of you who haven't followed this, potential operational delineations. These are basically boundary areas that make firefighting easier, that make prescribed fire easier and make managed fire easier because you've set up a network of fuel breaks and other areas that make it easier to contain those fires, make it easier for fire officials to make a stand with their machines and their efforts. So a priority in the next decade is going to be to build out a statewide network that's linked on federal side, state side, and with large private landowners. Another priority, again, is expanding beneficial fire. That is where it makes sense, primarily in Northern California, but in strategic areas in Southern and Central California. We're doing a lot in this space, as many of you know, to streamline permitting, to expand cultural burning. We've got a reliability fund up and running, smoke management coordination efforts, et cetera. So a lot underway with beneficial fire. Restoring post-fire landscapes. As many of you know, we've had a huge number of large megafires, particularly since 2020, and those are often creating very large areas that simply aren't going to regenerate on their own. So another priority of the landscape strategy is going to be to accelerate and expand our more active reforestation efforts, and particularly facilitate those that are climate informed to deal with rising temperatures. And also together with that, a new strategy we're putting together that focuses specifically on shrublands and grasslands to try to make sure that we do everything we can to protect them in light of some of these changes that are in front of us. So again, the keys to resilience in the north, big focus on fuel breaks, fire zones, high hazard areas, reducing density, reforesting, and ramping up beneficial fire. And then in Southern and Central California, much more of an emphasis on reducing ignitions and a fuel break network, and of course, restoring montane forest and other important oak woodlands and other species that need to be treated either by thinning or beneficial fire. So you pull all this together, big emphasis in the next 10 years on treating these high priority landscapes, getting that fuel break network up, and zeroing in on reforestation priorities. If we can do that, our modeling and our data show, we can then begin to shift our emphasis to rapidly scaling beneficial fire where it's appropriate, and restoring those newly burned areas. So big goal, can we make our forest and our landscapes more resilient over the next 10 years so that we can shift into a lower cost maintenance mode beyond that? So that, again, that's sort of the 10,000 foot level, a lot more information than that. It's in the plan. We're also emphasizing that we need to continue work on these shared strategies on everything from beneficial fire to landowner assistance to recreation, reforestation. As I said, a new strategy that we're just beginning to develop on chaparral and shrubland conservation that'll have particular relevance for Central and Southern California. Moving on to community preparedness. Obviously, these are linked, but community wildfire preparedness has its own goals at a different scale, a much more of a community scale. The next several slides walk you through some of those priorities. First and foremost, of course, is trying to emphasize the importance of defensible space and home hardening. As many of you know, the Board of Forestry is nearing completion of setting its Zone 0 standards throughout the state, and CAL FIRE has a number of efforts underway to develop common data standards that can better measure the effectiveness and performance of efforts at both the structure level and the community level, so that we've got standard ways of assessing this across the state and standard risk models to better plan and prioritize projects in those areas. So that'll continue to be a high priority. Second level of priority is, ramping up county-based CWPPs. There's a lot of organizations statewide that are working at the community level. CAL FIRE is convinced that if community plans can really be the anchor of those efforts, because counties can enable it to be linked to smoke programs, open space programs, evacuation routes, housing, et cetera. So we're really going to be leaning on county-wide CWPPs, not necessarily county government, could be fire safe councils and other organizations, RCDs that are county-wide, but really thinking that geographic area hits the sweet spot. And then, of course, in addition to that, we've really got to be focusing or continue our focus on unwanted ignitions here. The Caltrans network and the utility network is going to continue to be a priority. We're growing our partnerships with utilities, growing our partnerships with Caltrans. Southern California is leading the way with its ignition reduction program. You'll see a link to that that Kristen has just put on the screen. We'd love to see that in the rest of the state. Partnerships with the Forest Service, CAL FIRE, utilities, and Caltrans to really get a handle on unwanted ignitions. And then finally, our third element of the overall plan focuses more on the nuts and bolts of how do we actually get this work done. Our goal is to try to align state, federal, local, again, private and tribal systems through an integrated effort that tackles all aspects of wildfire resilience, from planning to permitting to implementation to reporting and funding. Starting with planning, we're rapidly moving towards a concept of developing interagency 5-year plans. These are the regional priority plans you see on the left at the landscape level. Our goal is to have a statewide network of regional priority plans that I know many of you are involved in at the landscape level. And then, as I said, at the community level, we're hoping to develop a statewide network of county level wildfire protection plans, and certainly we'll hope that the two are coordinated and are linked to each other. The next couple of slides give you a sense of how that's a change from where we are now. This is example from Southern California, but it could be true anywhere. We've mostly funded landscape work on a project by project basis, nearly 2,000 projects funded and mapped using our dashboard. That's been an effective process. We've really used that process to hit the highest priority landscapes. As you'll see from the next slide, Public Policy Institute of California did analysis and said 83 of the acres that have been treated through our grant programs have hit these highest priority areas. So we've got some good data through that process and through CAL FIRE's tracker that demonstrates the effectiveness of the projects. The challenge we face is we're just not going to get to where we need to go on a project by project basis. So we're continuing to scale up. The next slide gives you a flavor of just one example of that in Southern California, which is, again, rather than funding individual projects across the South, CAL FIRE lumped together their forest health, wildfire prevention funding, and gave a block grant to the whole region that led to 6 sub-regional grants across 23 sites with 20 partners. So this is really going to be the wave of the future, shifting to grants for individual projects to block grants for priority plans that tackle whole areas. This is rapidly underway. It's not just a concept. As you see from the next slide, you've got 3 different agencies. Sorry, you can go one more slide. 3 different agencies, CAL FIRE, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and DOC, all launching these programs across the board. So we hope that you'll join this effort in helping us move towards a much more of a landscape scale effort. If you go back to the previous slide, sorry about that. One of the other big benefits of this is we can better measure the results at a landscape scale than you can at the project scale. This is an example of a projection of potential benefits of ignition reduction projects across Southern California. Really powerful information to be able to show the legislature and the administration that if we can get funding for these projects, we can get significant reductions in fire risk and other metrics that are underway. We've got a fairly significant program out there to shift from acres treated to outcome-based metrics. And so, of course, we're struggling with exactly how to do that from a boundary perspective. Spent a lot of time with the Forest Service trying to align ourselves to facilitate this kind of a landscape level project. So we've done that by breaking the task force into 4 different regions, and you are one of the 4 that we're having these webinars on, where we hope to keep most of the national forest intact, to respect those 4 boundaries, recognizing that they each have, very different priorities and different mandates. And then we're also taking it to the next level, working with the RFFC program. On the left is the map of those areas that are in yellow already have completed priority plans, and those in green are where they're coming. We're going to pair that with a reporting structure that takes a little bit of a bigger picture, roughly 15 areas across the state, where we're going to try to put together reporting of all the projects that have taken place in each of those areas and better measure the results of those areas, the benefits of their projects using outcome-based measures, and then to develop a comprehensive set of plan projects for all of those areas, run them through our modeling system so we get a good handle on what, again, the benefits would be. So for each of those regions on the right, we're hoping to pull together cost estimates, project list, and estimates of benefits of projects so that we can better make the case to the legislature and others for not just the funding we need, but the benefits that we're going to get from these projects. Again, just to summarize all this, everything from planning integration plan at the landscape level and the community level, a real focus on priority setting of high hazard, dense landscapes and areas of high ignition risk, moving from individual project grants to block grants, moving from scattered permitting to one-stop shop permitting, trying to get interagency teams together to implement projects, and then again, shifting our reporting from acres treated to a series of outcome-based measures. And then we're going to continue to track all that through our interagency tracker, and we hope to establish a new wildfire resilience data hub. So all of this tracking information and data sets that are helpful in planning, prioritizing, and reporting will be available to everyone. I think that pretty much wraps it up at the big level. I'm certainly happy to answer any big picture questions now, and then we'll move in on a presentation more specifically on how some of our central coast leaders are moving things forward.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. That's a great overview of the plan, which touches on quite a few issues. We do have time for some questions for Patrick about what has been presented here, big picture questions about the plan or topics that maybe you would like to hear a little bit more about. The way to ask questions is to either raise your hand using the Zoom feature, and we can call on you to come off mute and ask your question, or you can use the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar. We do have a question, Patrick, coming in about the block grant approach as part of the regional action framework, and if you can comment on maybe how this approach has evolved and how it retains the competitiveness and the fairness of other
that's a
grant-making
good
approaches.
question. CAL FIRE and Department of Conservation have been piloting this for the last couple of years. And again, I think the effort is going to be to try to go statewide on this. One of the challenges with what I would call the old approach is it really rewards folks who are sophisticated enough and have enough money to develop shovel-ready projects. As we shift to more of a regional planning process, we'll continue to have the RFFC program funding capacity building for those that are further behind, and then we'll have CAL FIRE continuing to fund implementation. And so by having both pots of money, one for capacity and one for implementation, we hope to level the playing field and not just reward folks with implementation money that have the resources to put together really high quality plans. So that's been taking place to a large extent the last couple of years. We're going to accelerate that moving forward. Where I hope we will move actually is away from competitive grants, where we'll develop sustained funding for each region that's tailored to the needs of those regions so that we don't have, in particular, areas within regions competing against each other. Much rather have a block grant for each subregion that's tailored to what they need and to provide money that's sustainable that they can count on. We're moving somewhat in that direction with the North Coast and Southern California. Hopefully, we can do that more and more in the future.
Thanks, Patrick. Anyone have a question? They want to raise a hand? If not, we can also move on to the regional presentations, and you can continue to share questions in the Q&A or hold them until after we hear from the regional speakers.
There's one hand raised, Maddie. Not sure if you can
Oh,
see it from
thank
your
you.
view. Yep.
Thanks. I'm seeing a hand raised for Linda. Linda, you should have the permission needed to come off mute and ask your question. Thanks. We are not hearing you, Linda. If you want to ask your question, you'll need to unmute yourself, and then we'll be able to hear from you. Can you try again to unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, my question is that in previous versions of the 2021 action plan, there was a lot more emphasis on landowner engagement with small landowners. And it seems that this newer version of the plan doesn't explicitly have pathways for small landowners to receive any sort of technical assistance or funding that isn't already directly tied to some sort of organization or institution. And I'm wondering what the pathway is for them to be able to get funding for that. I represent a coalition organization that has a lot of different private landowners and other groups that are looking to implement prescribed fire specifically on private lands and with non-agency burners. And we're looking for resources.
Yeah, it's a great question. We may need to fix that. We may need to elevate the role of private landowners. There is a small section in the plan that addresses the role of small private landowners. We also have a private landowner, I forget the exact name of it. It's one of our shared strategies for private landowners, and we hope to get that completed and issue. That's a full-blown plan, shared strategy, as we call it, that seeks to align the private landowner assistance programs of the Forest Service, Forest Service, NRCS, and CAL FIRE. I know the federal side's had some significant reductions in their programs, and certainly CAL FIRE has lost some money as well, but they do continue to have, as you probably know, the so-called CFIP program that helps fund private landowners. We also, I think, and this is something we need to make a bigger point of, is we need to get private landowner efforts into these regional priority plans. Using your organization, using the RCD network, et cetera, that's the best way to make them prominent and get them funded. To be candid, money for private landowner assistance programs on their own never seem to get the level of funding they merit, given that private landowners, I think, represent 40% of the forested landscapes in the state. And so we've been thinking about then maybe if we can figure out ways of incorporating them into these regional priority plans, and if we do block grants for the priority plans, and actually down the road potentially require priority plans to have programs, specific programs that ensure that private landowners in those specific areas are a significant part of the plan. So I appreciate your highlighting that. We'll have to go back and make sure we beef that section of the plan up. And certainly feel free to submit that as a comment. Love to see it and love to get your ideas on how specifically to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks for that question, and thanks, Patrick, for that thoughtful answer. It is now time for us to transition to hearing from regional presenters, and we'll have a second Q&A at the end. Our first presenter is Kostula Valianos, who's with the State Coastal Conservancy, and then we will transition to hearing from Jeff Hayes with the Forest Service. So I will pass it over to you, Kostula.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kostula Valianos. I'm a project manager with the State Coastal Conservancy and a programmatic lead for the Conservancy's Wildfire Resilience Grant Program. Next slide. Before we jump into the work of the Central Coast, I wanted to give a brief introduction to the State Coastal Conservancy. We're a grant funding state agency, and we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. Our vision is for a beautiful, restored, accessible coast for current and future generations of Californians. And we have a long history of being conveners and having strong partnerships throughout the state and nationally. Our jurisdiction is the coastal draining watersheds, which span a third of the state and 75% of the state's population, or include 75% of the state's population, and you can see here in this lighter green area. And our grant program includes our whole jurisdiction from Del Norte to San Diego. But today we're going to focus on the Central Coast, and this area is the hatched area you see here, which is basically the Bay Area, except for Napa, Sonoma, and Solano, and extends south to Ventura. Over the last 7 years, through Department of Conservation, Regional Forest, and Fire Capacity grants, we have been building regional wildfire resilience capacity with partners and developing a regional priority plan, which Patrick talked a little bit about, for the Central Coast, and we'll dive into in just a bit. Next slide, please. So 90% of the Central Coast region's population is found in the Bay Area, anchored by job centers in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and Oakland. It includes dense urban development sprawling into exurb bedroom communities. Portions of the Bay Area's development abruptly abut wildlands and open space, as shown here in the East Bay Hills. Next slide. Counties south of the Bay Area are much less populated and dominated by industries such as agriculture, education, and tourism. And land ownership is a complex mosaic in the Central Coast, comprised of private owners, land owned and managed by state, local, regional park, and open space districts. And in some counties include federally owned lands such as National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, and the Forest Service. The Los Padres National Forest, for instance, spans 4 counties in the Central Coast. The patchwork of ownership is most evident south of the Bay Area, where networks of underdeveloped wildlands connect cities and many smaller communities, and where small privately owned parcels are nestled within the wildland-urban interface. Next slide. The Central Coast is incredibly biodiverse. A variety of ecosystems are found in this region, including chaparral and coastal scrub, shown here in the foreground of this image, where we can see plants actually resprouting from the Colorado fire in 2022 in Big Sur. Next slide, please. Other systems include oak woodlands and savannas. Next slide. Coastal prairie, mixed conifer, and as shown here, mixed hardwood systems. Next slide. As well as the majestic coast redwood, which extends to its southern limit in Monterey County. Historic fire regimes in the Central Coast vegetation types vary from frequent low intensity in the grassland, prairie, and oak woodland systems to mixed severity in the coast scrub, Douglas fir, tan oak systems, and less frequent high fire and high severity in chaparral, coastal and closed cone pine. Next slide, please. Similar to the rest of the state, centuries of fire suppression, including the exclusion of beneficial fire, expansion of communities into the wildland-urban interface, introduction of invasive species have stressed these systems and altered the fire regimes. Drought, disease such as sudden oak death and gold-spotted oak borer, and climate change are extending the fire season and further increasing risk of catastrophic fire. Some additional Central Coast challenges include the fact that we have some of the highest cost per acre for treatments, in part due to terrain, access, lack of local labor, and complex permitting requirements, and the eradication of some invasives can also be particularly expensive. One such example is eucalyptus. Unfortunately, this highly flammable Australian native was planted throughout the Central Coast in the late 1800s for a variety of reasons and has ended up being aggressively invasive. It can cost over $10,000 per tree removal and require several years of follow-up treatments with herbicide to prevent dense resprouting. Disposal of biomass also poses a significant challenge for us. With all of the work that needs to be done, where will the biomass generated end up? The Central Coast has few operating mills, but that's only an option if the material is marketable. There aren't many options for hauling off-site for composting or cogeneration, leading to on-site methods such as chipping or pile burning. Next slide, please. But there's progress being made, and in the next few slides, I'd like to discuss some of the work related to the new action plan's framework for mobilizing action. Specifically, we'll look at items such as improved planning, streamlining environmental review and compliance, expanding implementation partnerships to increase capacity to implement the work. Next slide, please. So let's talk planning. Specifically, in the Central Coast, our planning and prioritization work, which is an integral part of the action plan, is where we're preparing a pipeline of projects for implementation. Given the diversity and complexity of the landscape, regional priority planning is occurring at the 9 sub-regional level, so largely at the county level. They include Marin, Alameda and Contra Costa, Santa Clara, San Benito, Santa Cruz, San Mateo, Monterey, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura. Our sub-regional plans are often led by resource conservation districts or fire safe councils, and each regional planning group is made up of stakeholders that may include folks such as landowners, both public and private, tribes, fire safe councils, state parks, CAL FIRE, National Park Service, and Forest Service. Some land managers span multiple plans. The Los Padres, as mentioned previously, have staff involved with Monterey, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura sub-regional plans. And we'll hear a little later from Jeff Hayes, who'll be talking more about how the Forest Service is working with the Central Coast partners. Each regional priority plan group defines their governance and prioritization process independently, and it's tailored to their communities. In all cases, the regional priority plans are living documents and continue to evolve. The Conservancy's role is as convener, bringing regional priority plan teams together, supporting them, and sharing resources. And ultimately, the Central Coast Regional Priority Plan will be a clearinghouse of all of their work, showcasing their projects, as well as providing links and information of how people can stay informed and engaged. Next slide, please. Our regional priority plan partners are also working across their sub-regional plans. Partners have been meeting through the Central Coast convenings hosted by the Conservancy and also collaborating on projects on their own. In 2024, partners in Monterey and Santa Cruz counties were awarded a $71 million NOAA Climate Resilience Regional Challenge Grant, and approximately $11 million of which was focused on wildfire resilience. Moving forward, regional priority plan partners will continue to collaborate and expand their work across the sub-regional plans, as the action plan has also described. Next slide. On the coast, we are also subject to the Coastal Act and coastal development permitting. Forest health and fire resilience public work plans provide streamlined coastal development project approval for projects designed and consistent with the California Vegetation Treatment Program, known as the CalVTP. San Mateo and Santa Cruz Resource Conservation Districts were the first to develop and have the Coastal Commission approve their public work plans. Their plans served as templates for how others could use this process. Several other partners have followed, including Upper Salinas, Los Tablas, and Monterey, and most recently state parks in 2024. The Tomales Bay State Park Forest Health and Fire Resilience Public Works Plan is unique in that it is the first one adopted for a state park and serves as a model for how state parks can use this streamlining tool. Next slide, please. I also want to highlight a few projects led by our tribal partners and how they are increasing the region's capacity to implement wildfire resilience work. the Tamiya Nation Cultural Fire Stewardship, and the Amamutsan Land Trust Native Stewardship Corps each have workforce development programs where participants are learning and implementing ecological fire management and traditional fire management practices on their respective ancestral lands, in addition to gaining a variety of other knowledge and skills. Both these programs are founded in partnerships. The Amamutsan have worked with a variety of partners on this program and other cultural burns work, including the Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association, the Mid-Penn Open Space District, and the Peninsula Open Space Trust. The Tamiya Nation is currently partnering with state park partners at the Henry Coe State Park. The YTT Northern Chumash nonprofit is working on a cultural burn program called the YTT Good Fire Promotion Program. In addition to creating this multi-year cultural burn program, they are training tribal members in fire ecology and cultural burning, and they're also conducting cultural burns with partners in San Luis Obispo County, such as CAL FIRE and the city of San Luis Obispo. The Esalen Tribe of Monterey County's project supports tribal wildfire resilience through cultural burning and training on their recently acquired ancestral lands, the Los Tulurcicos Creek Rancheria. Next slide, please. Prescribed burn associations are also instrumental in helping the Central Coast bring more beneficial fire to the landscape. These groups offer training, technical assistance to landowners, develop burn plans, and conduct burns. The Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association works in San Benito, Santa Cruz, and Monterey, and they began as an offshoot of the UC Extension program, and they recently have become a nonprofit with their own board. They do endless work in the Central Coast and provide guidance for other PBAs emerging regionally as well as across the state. Ventura PBA is a part of the Ventura Resource Conservation District, and this group is conducting prescribed burns at the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy Steelhead Preserve to control invasive yellow star thistle, and are also working on oak woodland understory fuel reduction. We have two new emerging PBAs in the Central Coast, the South Bay PBA and the San Luis Obispo PBA. The South Bay PBA is focused on Santa Clara County, and it's a part of the Santa Clara County Fire Safe Council, and the San Luis Obispo PBA is housed in the Upper Salinas Las Tablas RCD. Next slide. We are also increasing the pace and scale of work by learning from each other. In 2022, the East Bay Regional Park District conducted a pilot project in Anthony Chabot Regional Park, where 80 acres were thinned and processed with a carbonator, which in the simplest terms is a high temperature dumpster fire that reduces biomass to less than 90% of the original volume and creates a high value product called biochar, which is an important soil amender, and it also reduces the emissions significantly in comparison to an open fire. Lessons learned from this project were extended to an additional 550 acres of parkland, and over the course of the 3-year project, 14,049 tons of biomass were processed, yielding 821 tons of biochar. The Park District hosted 50 tours of the Carbonator project for regional, state, and even Canadian partners. And we also have other partners in the region that are tackling this challenge as well. The Marin Resource Conservation District and Peninsula Open Space Trust are looking at regional strategies to address the biomass processing challenge. Next slide. So if you want to connect with the Central Coast partners or have questions, feel free to reach out to our team at wildfireresilience@sec.ca.gov. And then I will put in the chat a link to our website with our Wildfire Resilience Grant Program, and it has a lot of information about the program itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Kostula. That was a great overview of so many of the different concepts in the action plan brought into the Central Coast context. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And if folks have questions for Kostula, we are going to take those after the next presentation, but you can also feel free to put them in the chat. You can feel free to put them in the Q&A feature of the webinar. Next, we're going to hear from Jeff Hayes. Jeff is the Shared Stewardship Coordinator for the Forest Service in Southern California, and Jeff's going to share about some of the Forest Service's highly collaborative efforts to reduce wildfire risk and protect landscape health. Over to you, Jeff.
All right. Well, thank you, Maddie, and thanks, Kostula, for covering a lot of material that now I don't have to, and Patrick as well. And love those landscape photos. Here's one of Figueroa Mountain from Sedgwick Preserve for folks who know that territory. And I will go ahead and start with the next slide to go ahead and give an explanation that when we talk about Southern California for the Forest Service, we extend it all the way to Monterey because that's how far north the Los Padres National Forest extends. So over the past 5 years, under the existing task force action plan, we did collaboratively develop this holistic wildfire risk reduction strategy for Southern California, including the Los Padres National Forest, due to its ecological similarity. We've treated more than ever before to reduce risk, and those treatments have enabled firefighters to save communities, infrastructure, and ecosystems, such as during the 2024 Lake Fire on Figueroa Mountain. Our partners contracted work to thin forests, maintain fuel breaks, reduce ignitions, and create defensible space, as well as support tribal initiatives. And our firefighters completed work to burn those materials. The new action plan would further advance these regional strategies across boundaries with your help. And now we know their outcomes like never before. Next slide. All right, the Southern California Ignition Reduction Program is fully underway. You heard Patrick describe this a little while ago. We did complete NEPA compliance for the first 3 pilot projects this spring, and those are shown as ovals on this map, thanks to substantial support from Caltrans in particular. Implementation will begin within weeks to make these roadways less ignitable across boundaries. Now the executive committee is guiding the selection of the next rounds of roadways for a 10-year plan, expanding the effort to the northwest, to the Central Coast, and building efficiencies to grow at scale among many partners. We have regional forest and fire capacity projects shown as stars on this map. The scientific work has been led by UC Santa Barbara with support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And now, with support from the Coastal Conservancy, Santa Barbara Fire Safe Council is leading ignition reduction for highways 166 and 154 to avoid fires like the Madre and Gifford from last year. We need more of these projects throughout Central California, so we're really excited about the expansion of this program northwestward. Next slide, please. The Southern California Montane Forest Conservation Strategy is also fully underway to save our disappearing forests with project prioritization and community engagement workshops across the region using new tools. Forest treatment and reforestation is building across these sky islands, including those shown in this oval that are part of Central California. So again, we call it the Southern California Montane Forest Conservation Strategy, but what you see in the oval is in Central California. And our Good Neighbor Authority agreement with CAL FIRE also supports this work and more throughout Central California. The photo at bottom left shows the desired condition for these forests, a broadcast burn near Pine Mountain Club from this past winter. Next slide. This photo shows the Camino Cielo fuel break above Santa Barbara and begs the question, where else could we stop or slow a fire across this landscape? The map answers that question, showing the Central California pods across boundaries. You heard Patrick describe these. Many of these potential control lines are fuel breaks already. How many should be fuel breaks must reflect firefighter access and maintenance limitations. With upcoming completion of the pods for all these areas that don't have them, and then the strategic fuel break assessment that we published this past winter, and fire modeling I'll mention in a moment, we now have the information to identify a sustainable strategic fuel break network. Meanwhile, our increased treatments have the fuel breaks in far better condition than in the past, preparing us for the 2026 wildfire season. And we appreciate that the new action plan calls for a chaparral conservation strategy, which will synthesize the science and management needs for this globally significant ecosystem. Next slide. Management of the invasive gold-spotted oak borer is another priority for the region, most certainly, since it will spread as shown on this map if it is not systematically managed. The circle shown here is its current extent, which includes Ventura. Tree People has stepped forward to lead a new GSOB coalition, and Santa Barbara Fire Safe Council is planning for early detection and rapid response on the Central Coast. While many partners to the south of you are treating oak trees for containment of its spread and removing dead oaks for wildfire risk reduction. The action plan would benefit from including a statewide oak woodland conservation strategy with tribal leadership to address this threat and more to these precious ecosystems. Thanks to Jolene Tam of the La Jolla tribe for both her leadership for the management of this pest and these images that illustrate this challenge for both landscapes and communities. Next slide. As you've already heard from both previous presenters, biomass utilization is a challenge throughout Central California. And we are currently exploring the use of Charboss technology, a much smaller air curtain incinerator than what Costula showed you, one that can be trailered from site to site. So it's an air curtain incinerator that generates biochar, just like the other one did, and it will recycle our hazardous fuels for carbon sequestration and soil amendment. This work has been funded by the Department of War and USGS in partnership with Fort Hunter Liggett and Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And later this year, vegetation cut along roadways in this region for emergency access will be transformed into biochar with accompanying research into conversion efficiency, especially for the shrubs, ember production, air quality, soil benefit. That's what you're looking at in the photo is soil plots that were established by Cal Poly SLO. And also the economics. All of this is intended to help us understand to what extent this type of tool can help solve our biomass problem. Next slide, please. As you heard Costula describe, the regional forest and fire capacity partners are critical for addressing all of these boundary spanning challenges, coordinating among local partners. The 5-year plans of the Forest Service will be incorporated into each of their regional priority plans, and we look forward to their growth as laid out in the action plan. But the pace and scale can grow even more if large amounts of funding are provided directly to implementation partners with capacity, like National Forest Foundation and Tree People, to accomplish the highest priority work across boundaries. This image that you're looking at shows the wildfire hazard in the region extending from Interstate 5 to Santa Barbara. And you can see high hazard across much of the Los Padres National Forest in this area. So I'd like to finish by talking about values. So if you can click again, you can see a number of treatments shown in a variety of colors. I'm not going to dive deep into what those colors mean, but there are fuel breaks, there are montane forest treatments, there are defensible space treatments, and in particular, the yellow are partner treatments that have been identified. And then if you can click one more time, we now have the fire modeling in place to be able to effectively evaluate what these treatments accomplish, the outcomes that Patrick was describing before. What do we get for these treatments? We get reduced risk with, on this map, the bluer, the darker blue is more risk reduced, not just for communities, not just for infrastructure, but also for ecosystems. And so we have ways to measure this that we have not had until now. We have commissioned Vibrant Planet to provide this information because they've got state-of-the-art fire modeling that we were able to customize to the Central California ecosystems to be able to plan treatments for multiple benefits and articulate those benefits to garner more investment. So for projects that are within 5 miles of the Los Padres National Forest, you can use the platform to do this for yourself. To get access, there is an email address in the chat. Since everyone benefits from reduced wildfire risk, we hope that everyone will contribute to it as envisioned by the task force and the action plan. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Great overview of so many different efforts that you all are making throughout the region, and appreciate all of the different links that have been shared in the chat that also complement Jeff's presentation. We now have time for questions for Costula, for Jeff, for Patrick from the audience. Again, you can get those questions to them by using the Q&A feature or by raising your hand. This is your chance to ask 3 people with different and very rich experiences in this space.
Maybe I'll ask a question for
Go
Kostula,
for it.
which is what's your I said not your schedule. What's the Central Coast anticipated schedule for, do you think, for having priority plans for each of those, you said 9 areas?
Yeah, so all of the subregions have a version of a
You do.
plan.
Okay.
Some are more activated, to use the task forces, or I guess DOC's term, but right now they all have a version from San Benito all the way down to Ventura. I would expect, so the Conservancy is planning to publish our regional priority plan, which will be the clearinghouse, and that should be coming in the next month or so. So there'll be links available to folks to, hone in on what the various sub-regional plans are doing. It'll have a summary of the 3 components of a regional plan: the governance, the methodology, assessment, as well as a sneak peek on some project highlights, and then links to the actual plans for each of the subregions. So they exist. And our clearinghouse is coming up soon. Our site where you can find it all in one place is going to be out very, very soon. So we're just in the final stages of vetting it with partners.
Okay, and give me and the crowd a sense of how broad these are. In other words, all management agencies, some of them. Do you have Caltrans? Do you have utilities, etc.?
Yeah, all of those partners, it really varies by the sub-region, and it depends on the engagement within that region. So folks are invited, of course, and those that are they're continuously invited. All of the plans, you have an opportunity to participate now and in the future, but. For the most part, I would say all of those folks that you mentioned have been invited. Whether they're actively participating depends on the particular region.
All right, thanks. Great progress. That's wonderful.
Thanks, Patrick, and thanks, Kostula. We've had a couple questions come up in the Q&A. This is a question for Jeff that also I think the other speakers could maybe comment on. Jeff, this is a question from Joanna. You brought up the idea of a statewide oak conservation strategy. Can you speak more to what your hopes for that would be, what that could look like? Patrick, also, if you have any thoughts on when and how that might unfold, Joanna would like to hear about it.
Well, there are lots of oak experts that know far more about them than I do. But I know enough to know that our oaks are in trouble. So, we've got GSOB moving from the south to the north. We've got sudden oak death moving from north to south. We've got certainly impacts from all sorts of stressors on our oaks across California. And so we've got excellent strategies for managing our forests, and we're developing them for our shrublands. And I just think, well, the oaks are also in need of such attention. We've got such excellent scientific knowledge, but translating science into management is sometimes the bigger challenge than just accomplishing all the science. And so that's what I would hope to see, is that we take all of the science that's out there about oaks and what they need, and their importance. That's another piece of why tribes certainly should be involved. The importance of oaks to our cultures and our ecosystems couldn't be overstated. And so that's a few of the reasons that I had a strategy like that in mind.
And Patrick, do you envision maybe in sometime in the next 5 years that might be an outcome of the action plan?
It could be. I think one of the challenges we all have is defining the scope of the task force and the action plan. On the one hand, we keep emphasizing that it's grounded in wildfire resilience, but also gets into drought resilience and all that. That's different, but complementary to conservation planning. That is the lead for agencies like Fish and Wildlife at both the state and federal side. So it may be an idea that we talked to Fish and Wildlife about, that we talked to 30 by 30 folks about. It's something I'd like to do, but it would really have to have a wildfire resilience focus for us to make it an emphasis, rather than say defer to the conservancies or others. I mean, this is the biggest challenge that we have, and while I have a second too, is the scope of these plans. And maybe Kasula, that's something you could talk about as well, is these all generally started out, they all have a wildfire resilience at their core, but they also have, often these priority plans have wildlife chapters, they have watershed chapters, they have habitat chapters, they have recreation chapters. And so the message we've been sending at the state level is the broader your plans are, the more funding sources you can attract, because you add a recreation element, all of a sudden those agencies can fund it. If you have a habitat element, you're more likely to get WCB funding, for example. At the same time, we're reluctant to mandate that every regional priority plan try to cover everything, because it then becomes difficult to manage. And so we're basically taking our guidance from the local and regional leaders. If you look at the plans for, let's say, the Eastern Sierra, big emphasis on water and recreation. If you look at plans in the northeast part of the state, big emphasis on timber. The Central Coast has its own areas of emphasis. And so when I think of, so that's the context, Jeff, where I think about things like oak woodlands. We really want to sort of leave it to each local and regional entity to say, these are the priorities for our area. And then think about, how do we align these plans with related conservation planning that's happening for open space, for wetlands, for wildlife? It's a challenge, candidly, because there's so many related efforts that are out there.
Hopefully we've answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you both. We have another question on the Q&A, specifically asking about managing CEQA requirements, balancing the need to manage CEQA requirements with getting wildfire project work done. Patrick, I don't know if you want to talk about recent progress on that or look more toward the future.
Well, again, I mean, we've gone through this exemption process that I think has been, fairly broadly accepted. Something like 450 projects approved, each one in less than 30 days. As I mentioned, there is an effort in the legislature, the bill number is AB 1370, to continue that process. But lots of challenges in the legislative process, and among the key stakeholders are, what are the sideboards for that program? Should there be acreage limits? What should be the parameters of that? And so we still got a ways to go before I think there's agreement. But I think the process that we went through, as an old line bureaucrat, I could say that it showed that it's possible. You can have a process that typically took several different agencies a couple of years for each of them to get through all the permitting process, to streamline that into a 30-day process. So we've demonstrated that it's possible to do. The question is, what's the level of comfort with that? How much can we extend that into a permanent long-term process? To be candid, there's a lot of tension surrounding that process, and folks want to make sure adequate protections are in place. And so as you said, this question, how do you balance that with the need to go fast? And hopefully we hit it right through this exemption process. But it's one thing to do it for a year or two, it's another to do it long term. And so it remains to be seen whether we're going to come up with something in the next month or so that hits the mark and has broad-based support. But I hope so.
I was going to chime in as well. So the Conservancy has on retainer a consultant to help with the bottleneck of that CEQA can sometimes pose. So how that works is partners or applicants reach out to us, tell us about their project, and the consultant helps with scoping, helps with suggesting various pathways. In some cases, has helped with when we had the governor's suspension, submitting, because they're, making sure that folks have the tools they need to submit into the portal, as well as developing project-specific analysis, tearing off of the CalVTP, helping with public works plans. So, we recognize that it can be a challenge, and trying to give our partners as many resources as possible. We're also encouraging folks to look at the Department of Fish and Wildlife CERP process with wildfire projects as well. I know at least a few have been approved, so where it's applicable and it makes sense to use that as a pathway, that's another great tool. And we appreciate what the task force has done with trying to streamline processes. If you look at that map of the governor's suspension projects that have been approved, there sure are a lot on the Central Coast. And we definitely appreciate really building the pace and scale through the streamlining. So
Thanks, Kostula. That's a great resource that I did not know about. Yeah, very cool to hear about how you all are supporting your partners with that. And Kristen, I see, also just put a link to the CERP program in the chat. Thanks, Kristen. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time here today. Really want to thank the panelists for their great presentations as well as answering those questions. To close out the webinar, we do want to let everyone know that we are in the middle of a 60-day partner review period for the draft action plan. You can download the plan and access a web-based feedback form at wildfiretaskforce.org. So get those comments in before August 7th. There is also ongoing tribal consultation taking place. The task force expects to share a final draft version of the action plan in the fall of this year. The task force has 2 more in-person meetings scheduled for 2026. One will be, like Patrick said, on the North Coast in October, and the other will be in December in Sacramento. All of these meetings are also very easy to join online. We also suggest going to wildfiretaskforce.org, where you can sign up for the governor's monthly update and access a lot of the resources that were shared here today. So once again, thank you all for joining. Thanks for your questions, and thanks to our presenters and speakers for all the great content. We look forward to seeing your feedback on the draft plan.